The award was still on the wall when they asked him to leave the room. That was the detail that stayed with James Okafor afterward. Not the embarrassment of being moved toward the door in front of 40 parents and a television camera, not the expression on the face of the official who had done it, not even Maya's face when she turned from where she was standing beside the water table and watched her father escorted out of his own open house. What stayed with him was the photograph. His photograph on the wall of Eastbrook's main corridor, mounted in the kind of frame that institutions buy when they want to communicate permanence. The gold seal of the National Educator Award, his name in the caption. His face looking directly at the camera with the expression he'd had at 34. When someone told him his work had been seen all the way to Washington, and he hadn't known yet what that would mean and what it would eventually cost. The frame had been there for 4 years. The Serzozuk, the district office, had put it there. They had been putting it in brochures for 3 years. Eastbrook Middle School, home of National Educator Award recipient James Okafor. The frame was in 14 separate pieces of district promotional material. James had counted. He stood in the hallway after the official had finished managing him out, and the door to the open house had closed. And he looked at his own photograph, and he thought about the specific quality of an institution that could display a person's achievement on its wall and simultaneously work to remove that person from the building the achievement was displayed in. He had been thinking about this quality for 6 months. Maya appeared at the far end of the hallway. She had come out through the side door, which meant she had seen what happened and had made the decision not to stay in the room where it had happened, which was the kind of decision Maya made with a speed and clarity that still surprised him even after 12 years of watching her make decisions. She walked to him. She did not say anything. She stood beside him and looked at the photograph. "Your tie is crooked in that picture," she said. "I know, you always tie it too tight on the left side. I know that too." She leaned against the wall beside the frame. "Mr. Patterson said something when they were walking you out." "What did he say?" "He said I didn't represent the school's official position." "On what?" "On the budget." Maya nodded slowly. "What is the school's official position on the budget?" "That there isn't a problem." She looked at the photograph again. "Is there a problem?" James looked at his daughter, 12 years old, in the yellow sweater she wore on days she considered important, with the direct gaze she had inherited from her mother and the patience she had developed on her own. He had not fully explained to her why the last 6 months had looked the way they had looked. The shifted schedule, the investigation, the meetings he came home from too tired to describe. He told her enough and not more, because 12 was old enough to understand that institutions sometimes protected themselves at the expense of the people inside them, and young enough that he did not want her to know this particular truth before she needed to. "Yes," he said, "there's a problem." Maya nodded again, the same way she nodded when he answered math problems correctly during homework sessions, not as if the answer surprised her, but as if it confirmed something she had already figured out. "Okay," she said. "Let's go home." James Okafor had been teaching at Eastbrook for 8 years. He had found the job the year after his wife, Diana, died. Found it, specifically, because the school was the one in the district that was closest to his apartment and the farthest from the kind of position his career should have taken him to, and he had decided that the year after Diana's death was not the year for ambition. He needed to be near Maya. He needed to be in a school where the buses ran the same schedule as hers. He needed to be in a building he could leave on time every day, and which would not ask him to stay late, and Eastbrook, which was understaffed in every department and desperate for experienced teachers, had given him exactly that arrangement. He had not expected to stay 8 years. He had stayed because the students at Eastbrook were the students who needed teaching done well, and got, mostly, teaching done adequately, and he could not figure out how to leave once he understood this. The scholarship discovery had happened in March. He had been on the district's curriculum advisory committee, a formality, mostly, when a spreadsheet was circulated that did not match the one he had seen earlier in the year. The discrepancy was small but specific. 4 names had been moved between tiers, and the movement corresponded to no change in their academic records. He had asked about it in the committee meeting. The response had been administrative language for, "This is not your concern." He had made it his concern. He had spent 3 weeks cross-referencing applications, tracking the names that had been moved up against school rosters, and building a documentation file that showed the pattern clearly. Children from families connected to district administration were being advanced in the scholarship pool at the expense of children from lower-income schools whose academic records were demonstrably stronger. Maya's name was in that group, the group that had been moved down. He had filed the formal complaint on a Tuesday. On Wednesday, his schedule had been changed. On Thursday, he had received notification of a performance review. He had connected these events without being surprised by them, because he had spent 8 years in a district that operated the way districts operate, and he had developed, over that time, a clear understanding of how institutional self-protection worked. He had been surprised by only one thing, that the complaint was still alive, that it had not been formally dismissed and buried, that somewhere in the system something was still moving. Rachel Kim had been appointed director of the district's Department of Education 6 weeks before the open house. She had come from a policy background, state-level education reform, accountability frameworks, the kind of work that built expertise in how systems were supposed to function, and, as a consequence, expertise in recognizing when they were not functioning that way. She was 38 years old and had taken this position knowing it was difficult and believing she understood the ways it was difficult. She had not anticipated the file that came to her from an address she didn't recognize, containing an essay written by a 12-year-old girl named Maya Okafor. The essay was not dramatic. Maya Okafor did not write dramatically. She wrote precisely, with the direct sentence construction of someone who had learned that the purpose of language was to communicate rather than to impress. She described her father's work. She described the scholarship process. She described the timeline of what had happened after the complaint was filed, in the way that a person describes events they have watched carefully. The schedule change on Wednesday, the performance review on Thursday, the open house on the following month, where her father had been removed from the room. She did not say these things were unjust. She simply said them in sequence and let the sequence do the work. At the end, she wrote, "I didn't send this to get the scholarship. I sent it because I want someone to know who my father is." Not the picture on the wall, the actual person. Rachel read it twice. She sat with it for a moment in the particular way she sat with things that required her to update her understanding of a situation. Then she opened the district's personnel records. She found James Okafor's complaint in the 4th layer of the administrative intake system, not filed incorrectly, exactly, but placed in a queue that did not have an assigned reviewer, which was its own kind of filing incorrectly, the kind that a sophisticated system produces when it wants something to exist on paper while not actually. She retrieved it and assigned it to herself. She spent the following 2 weeks building the picture that James's complaint had outlined and that the system had tried to prevent from being seen. The scholarship spreadsheets, the school rosters, the family connections, the before and after versions of the tier lists. She did this quietly, without announcing it to her superiors, because she had been in enough systems to understand that announcing an investigation before it was complete was how investigations were stopped. When she had what she needed, she went to her supervisor. Deputy Superintendent Harris was a man who had been in district administration for 22 years and who had developed, over those years, the specific tolerance for institutional inconvenience that comes from never having been the person most inconvenienced. He received her findings with the expression of a man who has been handed a problem he intends to resolve by making it someone else's problem. The Okafor situations needs to be addressed before it becomes external, Harris said. There's already a query from a journalist. If we get ahead of it with a disciplinary action, the complaint gets reframed as a disgruntled employee dispute and it loses. The complaint is accurate, Rachel said. Harris looked at her. Rachel. The spreadsheet was altered. I have 4 versions of it with different timestamps, and the alterations follow a consistent pattern that correlates with administrative family affiliations. She set the folder on his desk. I'm not asking what we should do about the complaint. I'm telling you what the complaint shows. This is going to be very disruptive. Yes, Rachel said. It is. She left his office without the outcome she needed and went to her own office and looked at the disciplinaries that someone had placed on her desk, already partially completed, requiring only her signature to initiate formal proceedings against James Okafor. She looked at it for a long time. She did not sign it. The public meeting on education reform was held on a Thursday evening in the district's administrative building, a larger venue than it needed to be, suggesting that someone had expected a larger audience than appeared, which was its own commentary. James had been contacted the prior week and asked to participate as a teacher representative. He had accepted, not because he expected to be given meaningful time, but because the alternative was absence, and he had spent 6 months demonstrating that he was not going to choose absence when presence was available. His name was removed from the speaker list 40 minutes before the meeting began. A district communications staffer told him there had been a scheduling change and that his segment would be moved to a future session. He nodded and took a seat in the audience. When the Q&A portion opened, he raised his hand. The moderator saw him and called on the person 2 seats to his left. He raised his hand again at the next opportunity. The moderator called on someone behind him. The 3rd time, he stood up. My name is James Okafor, he said. I teach at Eastbrook Middle School. I filed a formal complaint with this district 6 months ago, documenting systematic manipulation of the scholarship allocation process. That complaint has not been addressed. I would like 3 minutes to speak to this body on the subject of the reform process being discussed tonight. The moderator said there was a procedure for public comment that he should have followed in advance of the meeting. I was on the speaker list as a teacher representative, James said. My slot was removed 40 minutes ago. From the back of the room, a security officer began moving toward the aisle. On the wall above the panel table, the district's promotional banner was visible, the one featuring photographs of the district's initiatives. James's photograph was in the lower left corner, the National Educator Award, the same image as the one in Eastbrook's hallway. It was 2 feet to the right of the nameplate reading, Rachel Kim, Director of Education, T, who had been sitting at the panel table for the past 45 minutes and who had not spoken since the opening remarks. The security officer reached James. He said quietly, Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. James looked at the officer. He looked at the banner on the wall. He went without making it difficult, because making it difficult in this room would not change the outcome and would give the room an easier story to tell about what had happened. He stood in the corridor outside and looked at the fire safety notice on the wall and waited for what came next. What came next was Rachel Kim, 4 minutes after the meeting concluded. She had the disciplinary form in her hand. She also had a folder he did not recognize. They stood in the corridor outside the meeting room with the sound of chairs scraping and conversations wrapping up, filtering through the door. I know what that is, James said, looking at the form. I haven't signed it, but you could. Yes. She held it without offering it to him. I want to show you something first. She opened the folder. It was the scholarship documentation. All of it, organized in the way that careful evidence is organized, in chronological order with the connections clearly marked. She had printed it, which suggested she had intended to share it with someone. He understood that he was the person she had decided to share it with. He looked through it. It took several minutes. She waited. This is what you filed, she said when he finished. confirmed, expanded. I found 3 additional cases you didn't have access to. James was quiet. I need a formal witness statement, she said. Not through the internal system. It'll get buried the same way the first complaint did. I'm going to a state review board. But I need someone who can speak to the pattern directly and who is willing to do it publicly, knowing that this is going to be a difficult process. James looked at the folder in his hands. He thought about Maya in the yellow sweater in the hallway. He thought about her standing outside the scholarship ceremony in the dress he had gotten up early to iron. He thought about the cold rice she had learned to make soft, the way her mother had liked it, set aside in a container for later. He thought about what he had told her 6 months ago, when she asked if he regretted the complaint. "I'll do it," he said. "It will be difficult," she said. "I've been managing difficult for 6 months already. That part I know how to do." She nodded. She did not say anything about the disciplinary form. She folded it in half and put it in her jacket pocket. He did not ask what she was going to do with it. He understood that some things were answered by actions rather than words. The press conference was held at Eastbrook. Rachel had chosen the location deliberately, not for symbolism. She was not primarily a symbolic thinker, but because the documentation she was presenting had its origin in this school, and the people most affected by it were connected to this building, and it seemed right to present it in the same place. She had notified the State Review Board, 2 journalists she had worked with previously and trusted to be accurate, and the district's Board of Education, who had received the notification at 8 in the morning for a 10 o'clock press conference, which gave them enough time to be present and not enough time to do anything preventive. She stood in front of the school, and she read from the documentation for 20 minutes. She named the officials involved. She described the mechanism. She used the word fraud once, precisely, where it was the accurate word. She said that James Okafor's complaint had been correct in every material particular and had been deliberately delayed by officials who stood to benefit from the delay. She said that effective immediately, the scholarship awards for the current cycle were being reviewed by an independent panel. She said that the review would result within 30 days in corrected allocations based on the original qualifying criteria. Then she looked at the list in her hand. "I want to read one name," she said. Maya Okafor, Eastbrook Middle School, first-ranked applicant in the district in the qualifying cycle, whose award was held pending the outcome of a complaint that should never have affected her application at all. She receives her scholarship. Her award is retroactive to the beginning of this term. James was inside. He had been inside for most of the press conference in his classroom, where he had a 7th grade class that started at 10:15 and that he was not going to cancel because a press conference was happening outside, because the class was not the press conference's problem, and the students were not the political situation's resource. And he had been the person who said, in the room that no longer let him speak, that he did not represent the school's official position. And if that was the position he was in, then he was going to represent his actual position, which was here, in room 14, teaching. He heard his daughter's name through the open window. It carried clearly in the fall air. He stopped writing on the board. He stood for a moment with the marker in his hand. Then he kept writing. The following week, Rachel Kim appeared at the door of room 14 on a Tuesday morning. She had not called ahead. She had texted James the previous evening to ask if she could observe a class. Just observe, no agenda, no media, and he had replied with the time. She arrived 2 minutes before it started and took the empty seat in the back corner that students left empty on principle because it was the seat with the broken desk arm and the view of nothing interesting. She sat there with a notepad she did not open for the first 20 minutes. James taught the way he always taught, which was without performance, without the heightened register that people adopt when they are being observed. He had learned early in his career that teaching to an observer was a different thing from teaching to a class, and that the difference was visible to the people in the seats in ways that the observer could not see. And so he had made the decision once, a long time ago, to simply teach the same way regardless of who was watching. He was going through primary sources. The students had a document, a letter from a historical period, and they were working through what the language revealed about the writer's position that the letter's stated content did not reveal. What you say and what you mean, and how to read the gap between them. Maya was in the third row. She had taken notes from the beginning. When James asked the class what the letter's tone revealed about the writer's actual confidence in his position, she answered without hesitation and was correct. And James said so with the brevity he applied to correct answers in class, which was the brevity of a person who believed that correct answers did not require celebration, only acknowledgement. This person here, Maya said, indicating the letter's author, he keeps saying he's certain, but he keeps explaining why he's certain. If you were actually certain, you wouldn't need to explain it. Yes, James said. He wrote it on the board. Certainty explained is certainty questioned. From the back corner, Rachel Kim wrote it in her notepad. At the end of class, as students were filing out, Maya stopped at the door and looked back at Rachel. "You're the one who read my name," Maya said. "Yes," Rachel said. Maya considered this with the same deliberate assessment she applied to most things. "My essay wasn't supposed to change anything," she said. "I know that's not how it works. Essays don't usually," Rachel agreed. "So why did it?" Rachel looked across the room at James, who was erasing the board. He was not looking at them. He was doing the thing he always did at the end of a class, clearing the board in sections, left to right, with the specific thoroughness of someone who believes that the next class deserves a clean surface to start from. "It made me understand something I had already found in a file," Rachel said. "Not the information. I had the information. It made me understand what the information meant for a specific person in a specific room. That's different." Maya thought about this. "So I didn't change what you knew. I changed how much it mattered." Rachel looked at the 12-year-old standing in the doorway of room 14. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what you did." Maya nodded, apparently satisfied, and left. The room was quiet. James had finished the board and was arranging papers into the organized stacks that characterized every surface he was responsible for. The specific order of someone who had spent 6 months in a situation he could not control and had kept his own spaces as controlled as possible in response. Rachel remained in the back corner. She was not sure what had made her stay. The next meeting was in 40 minutes, and the drive was 20 minutes, and there was nothing on her agenda that required her to be in this room any longer. "She's been like that since she was 4, James said, without turning from the papers. "Asks the question that makes you realize the question you should have been asking." "She's going to be formidable," Rachel said. "She already is," he turned. He was looking at her with the same careful assessment he had applied to the folder in the corridor outside the meeting room. The look that was about determining what a situation actually was, rather than what it presented itself as. "Thank you for what you did at the press conference." "I did what the documentation required." "You chose to do what the documentation required," he said. "Those aren't the same thing. Plenty of people look at documentation and choose something else." Rachel knew this. She had been in enough rooms to know this very well. "The deputy superintendent has filed a grievance about the process," she said. "He'll likely escalate." "I know. The State Review Board will take 6 months minimum. I know that too. Does it change anything for you?" James looked at the papers on his desk. He looked at the board, clean, pale, waiting for the next class. 6 months ago, I filed a complaint about something that was wrong," he said. "I knew what it would cost. I did it anyway. The cost arrived on schedule." He picked up his marker. Maya got her scholarship. The names got read into a public record. The documentation exists. He looked at Rachel. "That's not everything, but it's not nothing." Rachel stood up from the broken desk armchair. She picked up her notepad. The page with certainties explained is certainty questioned, written in her own hand. I'll be at the State Review Board proceedings, she said. I'll also come back to this class. If that's acceptable. James uncapped the marker. He turned toward the board to write the prompt for the next class. The seat in the back has a broken arm, he said. I noticed. The one on the left side of the third row is better. He began writing on the board. He did not look at her again, but the corner of his mouth moved in a way that Maya would have recognized immediately. The expression her father made when something landed exactly where it was supposed to. Rachel Kim walked out of room 14 and down the corridor and past the photograph in its permanent frame. The gold seal, his name. The face of a man at 34, who did not know yet what he was about to lose or what he was about to decide to do anyway. She paused in front of it. She had walked past it on the way in without stopping. She stopped now. The caption read, National Educator Award, James Okafor, Eastbrook Middle School. Below it, in small print, proudly displayed by the Department of Education. She looked at it for a long moment. She thought about the disciplinary form still folded in her jacket pocket. She thought about what she was going to do with it when she got back to her office, which she already knew, which did not require further deliberation. She walked out of the building into the fall morning, where the air was sharp and the leaves on the sidewalk were doing what leaves do in October. Going down in their own time, unhurried, each one landing where it lands and staying there. Some things, once placed in the record, do not come back up. That was the whole point,